this lesson, we will discuss in detail the properties of life. Remember that the properties of life are descriptions of an organism, qualities that it possesses. The first property that we will discuss is definite form and limited size. There are a few words that we will use to describe definite form and limited size. Symmetry refers to having a definite shape. Some organisms can be spherically shaped. A sphere is very similar to a ball. Organisms that have this spherical symmetry include volvox, which is a type of algae, and also this other type of algae, golden brown algae. So you can see the two images that you see here on the right. These organisms are both spherically shaped. They have spherical symmetry. Another type of symmetry is radial symmetry. Radial symmetry means that it is wheel-shaped. So the organism's body parts extend out and around in a circle. Some examples of organisms with radial symmetry include a jelly, like this moon jelly, and flowers. The last type of symmetry that we'll discuss is bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry means that the organism has two identical sides that are mirror images of each other. This blue morpho butterfly and humans also have bilateral symmetry. Some organisms break the rules and seem to have no definite shape. This is referred to as asymmetry. In this case, either the organism constantly changes its shape, like this amoeba, which can squirm about a petri dish, extending its pseudopodia, these arm-like extensions, and other organisms, like mold, can grow a fungal mycelium, which extends outward, kind of like the roots of a plant, but it goes indefinitely and doesn't necessarily have any definite shape. These are referred to as asymmetrical organisms. The second property of life that we will discuss is a limited lifespan. All organisms that live must also die at some point. Some organisms have a very short lifespan. Some cells have a lifespan of only a few hours. Insects might live a few weeks. Humans, on average, live about 75 years, and some trees can live for thousands of years. Regardless of their life expectancy, all organisms proceed through 5 stages of life. The first stage, of course, is birth. Some organisms are born out of eggs, some have live birth, and plants begin their life as a simple seed. After an organism is born, it enters a period of growth, where the organism is increasing the number and size of cells. This occurs through a process of cell division. Once the organism is no longer becoming larger, maturity has been reached. At this point, the organism is simply replacing cells or repairing cells that have been lost, rather than growing new cells or adding the number of cells to its body. At this point in time, the organism is ready to reproduce. After maturity comes old age. This is a period of decline in which the organism can no longer repair and replace its cells at the rate that it's losing the cells. The decline of old age eventually leads to death, where the organism's cells stop their function and the organism passes away. Property 3 is that all life is composed of one or more cells. Cells are the basic unit of life, but they are tiny. You would have to use a microscope in order to view them. Regardless of the cell that you're looking at, all cells have a basic cell structure that is recognizable under a microscope. Animal cells have certain features, including a cell membrane, which is kind of like the skin of the cell, The cytoplasm is the fluid inside the cell. The nucleus is where all the genetic information is contained. And vacuoles are where the animal cell would store cellular products. Plant cells have a similar structure to animal cells, with a few minor differences. Plant cells have a cell wall on the outside of their cell, which helps to maintain the structure and shape of the cell. It's just outside the membrane, which, just like on an animal cell, is like the skin. Inside the cell wall and membrane is the cytoplasm, the fluid-filled part of the cell. The nucleus is also where the genetic material is held. And lastly, a central vacuole, which contains mostly water, but some other cellular products as well. Overall, you can see by comparing these two types of cells that they are pretty similar. Property 4 is that all living organisms contain cytoplasm. Because all living things are made up of cells, and those cells contain cytoplasm, all living things must contain cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is mostly water. Actually, 70% of this fluid is water. The other components include proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. Property number 5 of living things is that they use only chemical energy. All of the energy in our ecosystem originates from the sun. This is called solar energy. Producers, like plants and algae, can capture this solar energy in a process called photosynthesis. In this process of photosynthesis, producers, like plants, can capture the energy from the sun. They also take in raw materials from their environment, like carbon dioxide and water, and they convert that into food in the form of glucose. This glucose is chemical energy, and it's what the entire rest of the ecosystem depends on. This diagram is a food chain. It tracks how chemical energy can be passed up through the feeding levels in an ecosystem. Like I said before, all of the energy in the ecosystem originates from the sun. The producers in the ecosystem can capture that solar energy through the process of photosynthesis and convert it into chemical energy that is stored in their body. When green plants and other producers are eaten by consumers, like this cricket, the chemical energy is transferred from the green plant to the cricket. The chemical energy is now stored in the body of the cricket. The chemical energy can be passed on again when the mouse eats the cricket. The chemical energy is then transferred to the body of the mouse. It can continue moving its way up the food chain. When the snake eats the mouse, the chemical energy is transferred to the snake. And when the hawk eats the snake, the chemical energy is transferred to the body of the hawk. In this way, you can see that all organisms are dependent on chemical energy in order to survive. All of this energy originates from the sun. The next property of life is adaptation to the environment, also called evolution. This property does not mean that an organism can change to fit its environment. A horse can't just decide to sprout wings and fly away. A human can't decide to grow a tail and live in the ocean. This is not how evolution works. Evolution occurs by a process of natural selection. Natural selection does not work on an individual basis, but rather in a population of individuals. Take these clams, for instance. They're all members of the same species, yet you can see that each of these individuals has different characteristics that make them unique. These differences are called variations, and they're based in our DNA. Adaptation by natural selection means that if a characteristic is favorable, it will help the organism to survive better, live longer, have more offspring, And that means that favorable characteristic will become more common in the population as a whole. For example, let's say that these clams live in a habitat where the sand is light-colored. That means that clams that have a lighter-colored shell will blend in better with their surroundings. This will allow them to survive longer because their predators cannot find them. Individuals like this blue-shelled clam might not survive as well, and therefore they will not get to reproduce. That means that in the next generation, you will probably see a higher incidence of clams with these lighter-colored shells. So again, it's not the individual clam that has decided to change its shell color to fit the environment. It's that the population as a whole has changed over time, one generation after the next. Let's recap the properties of life. Number 1, all living things have definite form and limited size. They have a limited lifespan. They are composed of one or more cells. They contain cytoplasm. They use only chemical energy, and they adapt to their environment through the process of evolution. Keep in mind that in order to be considered alive, an organism must have all of these properties, not just one. This is an all or nothing deal.